I stayed looking at those 2 messages on the screen for a stretch of time that I honestly could not measure. The bedroom was dark, the phone lighting only my hands and a small patch of the ceiling above me. Savannah outside was quiet the way it only gets after midnight. That small city silence that feels like the whole world has paused to wait alongside you. I took 3 slow breaths, something I had learned in a breathing workshop I attended once and never practiced again. But that came back on its own that night. 3 slow breaths, while I looked at Maya's name at the top of the screen and my mother Ruth's name below it. 2 women who represented 2 completely different worlds inside me, and both of them waiting for something I did not yet know if I had. I answered Maya first. It was not a grand decision. There was no soundtrack playing, no cinematic moment. It was just my thumb moving before my head could make an argument. I typed, "I am doing well too. And yes, I would absolutely love that documentary. Can I call you tomorrow?" I sent it before reading it back. The kind of message you send fast because if you reread it, you will delete it. Maya's 3 typing dots appeared almost immediately. She was awake. Of course she was. The dots disappeared, came back, and then the reply arrived. 1 word. Of course. With a period at the end that was not cold, it was steady. The kind of period that only Maya could make feel like a full embrace without a single extra word. I sat looking at that 1 word for about 30 seconds, with my heart doing something I could not accurately describe. It was not excitement exactly, not the dramatic version of that feeling. It was quieter than that. It was almost relief, the kind that comes when you finally put down something heavy you have been carrying for far too long. Then I opened my mother's message. "Lily, I need to talk to you." I read it 3 times trying to find her tone inside those words. My mother is a woman who chooses every word carefully when she is processing something difficult. That short message with no explanation, no Bible verse, no additional detail told me more than a full paragraph would have. She knew something. I did not yet know how much. I replied to my mother carefully. I typed, "Hi Mom, I am okay. You can call me tomorrow morning and we can talk." Simple, no closed doors, no open ones either. She replied with an okay and nothing more. That okay with no exclamation point, no heart, none of the emojis she normally used, was the confirmation that tomorrow's conversation was not going to be simple. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark. The ceiling of my apartment in Ardsley Park is plain and white with nothing interesting about it. But I stared at it like there was an answer written up there that I had not yet been able to read. The last 9 months kept moving through my mind. March, the studio, the parallel mirrors, the 2-hour coffee on Jones Street, the necklace, the park bench, the kitchen, the kiss that had lasted 3 seconds and changed everything. I fell asleep that night without noticing when it happened. It was not that restless kind of falling asleep I had been experiencing for weeks, that tossing and turning with the mind running at full speed. It was a quiet kind of sleep, the kind that comes when something that has been slightly out of place finally shifts 1 millimeter back where it belongs. Nothing was resolved, not even close, but something had started. The next morning, a Saturday in December, I woke up at 8 o'clock with the sunlight coming through the gap in the curtains and landing directly on my face. I lay still for a few minutes before reaching for my phone. There was a message from Maya sent at 7:45 in the morning. It said simply, "Good morning." Nothing else. 2 words. And I smiled before I was fully awake, that kind of smile that happens before you remember you are trying to be careful. I called Maya at 10 in the morning, after making coffee and spending about 20 minutes looking out the window trying to organize what I wanted to say. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was the way I remembered it, calm and present, without that hurry most people put into even a simple hello. I said hi. She said hi back. And we sat in a second of silence that was not awkward at all. I told her that I had spent 3 months trying to be fair to everyone around me and had forgotten to be fair to myself. That I did not have everything figured out, that I had no ready answers for anything. but that I did not want to keep standing outside something that was mine. Maya was quiet for a moment, and then said, in that low voice of hers, "I know." And I was already here. The conversation with my mother was still ahead of me, and I knew it was not going to be easy. But that Saturday morning in December, with the Savannah sunlight coming through my window and Maya's voice in my ear, I allowed myself to just be in that moment for a little while. It was 10:30 that same Saturday morning when my mother called. I was still by the window with my coffee cup, the same coffee that had gone cold twice because I kept forgetting to drink it, too busy thinking. Her name appeared on the screen, and I took a slow breath before answering. That breath you take before walking into a place you cannot know the size of until you are already inside. I answered with a voice that tried to sound normal. "Hi, Mom." She replied with a high lily that did not have the lightness she usually put into it. It had weight. It had that particular quality that mothers put into their voice when they are holding too many things at once and trying not to let everything fall at the same time. I knew that voice. I had grown up learning to identify every variation of it. She got to the point faster than I expected. She said that my Aunt Margaret had found a Twitter account that she believed was mine. She did not ask if it was mine. She said she believed it was mine. That difference between asking and stating told me she already had her answer and was giving me an exit I could choose to use or not. I did not use it. I said yes. It was mine. The silence that followed lasted about 8 seconds. I counted. I stood looking at the clock on the kitchen wall, watching the second hand move, while I waited for my mother to find her next words. 8 seconds of silence on a phone call with your mother after a revelation like that is a very long time. It feels like much more. She asked if what I had written was true. I said it was. She asked if I was certain about what I was feeling. I said yes. That it had taken time, but that I was certain. She went quiet again, this time for less than before, and then said something I had not expected. She said she needed to talk in person, that a phone call was not the right place for a conversation this size. I agreed. We scheduled for Monday afternoon at the house. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a while. It had not been the confrontation I had been dreading. There had been no crying, no Bible verse, none of the phrases I had spent weeks rehearsing responses to in my head. It had been contained, careful, the kind of conversation that is sometimes harder to process than an open argument. Because when someone does not explode, you have no way of knowing the size of what they are keeping inside. I messaged Maya and told her about the call. Maya replied asking how I was doing. I said I was in one piece, which was the most I could guarantee in that moment. She sent a short voice message, about 20 seconds. Her voice said that no matter how that Monday conversation went, I was not going to be alone after it. She did not promise it would be easy. She did not say it would all work out fine. She just said I would not be alone. I listened to that voice message 4 times. Sunday was strange. I tried to work, to go through some emails, to organize my schedule for January. I could not focus on anything for more than 10 minutes. I called Carol in the late afternoon and told her everything, about Maya, about the Twitter account, about my mother's call. Carol was quiet for 1 second, and then said that she loved me and that she was proud of me. I almost cried right there, not from sadness, from the relief of having a friend who did not need processing time before standing beside you. On Monday morning, I was up early and completely dressed long before I needed to leave. I stood in front of my mirror for a while. I was not trying to assemble a version of myself to present to my mother. I was just looking. The small scar on my chin was there the way it always was. I did not ask anyone to cover it that day. I went exactly as I was. My parents' house in the Ardsley Park neighborhood is the same house I have known since I was born. A brick front, a small garden, that smell of an old southern home that some houses have, and that you recognize before you even step inside. My father, Bill, was on the front porch when I arrived, sitting in his usual chair with a Bible in his lap. He looked at me, gave a slow, quiet nod of acknowledgement, and said my mother was in the living room. He did not say anything more, but he looked at me in a way I recognized. It was the same look as the food container, the look of someone who has known something for a long time and is choosing how to carry it. My mother Ruth was sitting on the sofa with her hands folded in her lap when I walked in. She was not on her phone. She was not holding anything. Just sitting, waiting. I sat in the chair across from her, and we spent a moment just looking at each other. She had dark circles under her eyes, which told me she had not slept well either. That pressed something in my chest I had not anticipated. Because as hard as this was for me, I could see it was hard for her in her own way too. She started by saying she loved me. That was the first thing. Not an accusation, not a Bible verse, not a question. I love you, Lily, spoken with a voice that trembled slightly at the end. And then she said that she needed time to understand, that there was a lot inside her that she did not yet know how to organize, that the way she had been raised, the faith she had built her whole life around, everything she believed was being shaken. She did not ask me to change. She did not tell me I was wrong. She said she needed time, and I said I understood. And it was true. I understood because I had needed time myself, and far more of it than she was asking for. I left my parents' house that Monday with a feeling I could not name accurately. It was not victory, it was not defeat. It was something in the middle of those two things, the way important things rarely arrive with a clear label telling you exactly what they are. I got in my car, put on my seatbelt, and sat there for a couple of minutes without starting the engine. The brick front of the house in front of me, the small garden, the living room window where my mother was probably still sitting. That house had been my entire world for a long time, and now I was learning to exist outside of it without asking permission. I drove straight to Maya's apartment. I did not text ahead, did not call first. I just went. She opened the door when I knocked and did not ask anything. She looked at me for a second, opened the door wider and said, "Come in." I came in, sat on the couch. August jumped onto my lap immediately like she knew I needed that. And I sat there for a while with the cat in my lap and Maya beside me without saying anything. That silence between us was never empty. It was always full of something that did not need words. After a while, I told her everything about the conversation with my mother. I told her about the I love you that came first, about the dark circles under her eyes, about the request for time. Maya listened without interrupting, the way she always listened, fully present, not already composing her response while I was still talking. When I finished, she said she thought my mother was brave for starting with I love you. I had not looked at it from that angle yet. I sat with that for a while. In those days between Christmas and New Year of 2019, my life started developing a new routine that I had not planned, but that settled into place naturally. In the mornings, I would wake up, make coffee. Sometimes Maya was there and sometimes she was not, but there was always a message from her when I opened my phone. A small thing, a good morning, a photo of something she had seen on the street and thought of me, a pointless question that mattered a great deal. I was learning that love sometimes fits into very small things. My mother took 11 days to call me back. I counted. Not anxiously, but I counted. On the 11th day, a Thursday morning between Christmas and New Year, my phone rang, and it was her. The conversation was shorter than the first one. She said she had talked with my father, that she had prayed a great deal, that there was still a lot she needed to understand, but that she was not going to go without talking to me while she figured it out. She said she was my mother before anything else. I had to bite my lip hard to keep from crying right there on the spot. Finn called me one afternoon that same week. He had heard through the network of people that Savannah inevitably is, that the conversation with my family had happened. He did not call to comment on it. He called to ask how I was holding up. We talked for almost an hour. He said something that stayed with me. He said that during our engagement, he had sometimes felt like I was present, but not fully there. and that now, for the first time since he had known me, I seemed like I was completely there. I did not know how to respond to that. I just said thank you in a way that tried to carry the real weight of the word. Maya and I spent New Year's Eve together at her apartment. It was not a party, nothing grand. We made a simple dinner, opened a sparkling grape juice when the clock turned midnight, and went out to her small balcony to listen to the fireworks going off over Savannah. She was standing beside me with her shoulder against mine, just like that park bench back in June, except this time neither of us was pretending the space between us was bigger than it was. When the fireworks ended, we went back inside. Maya collected the glasses. I washed them. She blew out the candles that were nearly finished. There was low music playing in the background, that instrumental style she liked. And at some point, without either of us having planned it, she stopped in the middle of the kitchen and looked at me in that way of hers that I already knew, but that still caught me off guard. That look of hers that asked for nothing but said everything. I moved toward her slowly. I put my hand on her face with a gentleness I did not know I had. She closed her eyes for a second when my hand touched her face, the way someone does when they are storing a moment before it passes. I stood looking at her for just an instant before anything else, thinking that it was the turn of the year, that 2020 was beginning, and that I was exactly where I needed to be. January arrived with that fresh start, feeling that January always carries. I went back to work, new contracts, new shoots. My agent Sandra did not bring up the anonymous email again. The conservative contract she had hinted at never materialized anyway, and my professional life continued without the drama I had spent months imagining. Cassie faded back a little, less present backstage, fewer messages. I did not ask why. Some absences are their own kind of answer. My mother Ruth started calling every week again. The conversations were shorter than before, more careful, like two people learning to speak a language they both know, but with new meanings attached to the familiar words. She did not ask about Maya by name. I did not push the subject. We were building something, slowly, without a name for it yet, but building. And sometimes building slowly is the only way to build something that actually lasts. The winter of 2019 had been left behind with everything it carried. The parallel mirrors in the dressing room, the 2-hour coffee on Jones Street, the necklace adjusted with hands that stayed 1 second too long, the park bench, the shoulders leaning, the space between the hands that was a conscious choice, the kitchen, the crooked words, the 3-second kiss, the 3 months of silence, the food container from my father, the 2 messages on the screen at 11:47 at night. All of it had happened at a speed that seemed impossible looking at it from outside. But from the inside, I knew that every single piece of it had taken exactly the time it needed. Not more, not less. January of 2020 arrived with that particular southern winter that Savannah does differently from anywhere else. Not cold enough for snow, but cool enough to make the Spanish moss on the oak trees look like it belongs in a painting. I was at a photo shoot on a property outside the city, a summer clothing campaign for a local brand, when I got a message from Maya during the lunch break. It was a photo of a coffee cup with a cookie on the side, and the caption said, "The coffee here is nowhere near as good as Jones Street." I laughed out loud under the shade tent with the entire crew around me having no idea why. That was the kind of thing she did. Small reminders that she was thinking about me in the middle of the day without needing a big reason to say so. We had stepped into 2020 with a lightness that I was still learning to trust. It was not naivety. I knew there was still a lot adjusting around us. My mother was still working through things. The professional world still had its quiet observations, and I was still figuring out how to be who I was out loud after years of being that person only in silence. But there was a new foundation underneath me that had not been there before, and I could feel it every morning when I woke up. Maya and I had developed a routine that formed itself without either of us sitting down to plan it. On Wednesdays, when neither of us had work scheduled, we would meet at her apartment, or mine. She cooked better than me, so it was usually hers. I would bring something, a fruit, a juice. Once I brought a small potted plant I had found at a farmer's market on Forsyth Park that I thought would look perfect on her windowsill. She put it in exactly the window I had imagined and never moved it. There was something I was learning to do with Maya that I had never properly managed with anyone before. I was learning to be seen, not photographed, not evaluated, not approved of. Seen. There is an enormous difference between those things that I only understood when I experienced it up close. Being photographed is about the image you project. Being seen is about who you are when the image is gone. Maya saw me in a way that sometimes left me not knowing what to do with my hands. On an afternoon in January, I was at her apartment flipping through a book I had taken from her shelf when she came to sit beside me with 2 coffees. She looked at me for a moment and then asked about the scar on my chin. Not in an intrusive way, with a genuine and gentle curiosity, the kind that comes from caring rather than gossip. I put the book down and looked at her. She was the first person who had asked about that scar in years. Everyone else either did not notice or pretended not to. I told her about the car accident at 16 years old. A Friday afternoon, driving home from school, my father's car hitting a speed bump too fast, and me hitting my chin on the back of the front seat. Nothing serious. 5 stitches, a small mark that stayed. I told her I always asked the makeup artist to cover it at shoots, that it had become an automatic habit. Maya listened and then said, in that low voice of hers, that she thought the scar was beautiful. Not in a forced way, not in a way that was trying to convince me of something, in a way that simply sounded like a fact. I did not know what to say, and she did not wait for me to say anything. At work, things normalized in a way I had not expected to feel so natural. Sandra called me in early February to present new contracts. No mention of the anonymous email, no conversation about image or discretion. Just work, just scheduling, just what it had always been. I walked out of that meeting with the feeling that some storms you spend your whole life fearing pass without doing the damage you had imagined. Cassie reappeared at a shoot in February. We greeted each other normally, talked about work, about a new brand that was hiring models in the area. She did not mention Maya, did not make any comments, did not send any emoji-laden messages. She settled into a professional distance that was more honest than the exaggerated friendliness that had come before it. I preferred that. Sometimes the most honest version of a relationship is the most distant one. Maya had been invited to participate in a small group art show that a gallery on Congress Street was organizing for local Savannah artists. She told me about it on a Wednesday evening, almost as an aside, giving it almost no importance, saying they had asked her to contribute 3 pieces. I stopped and asked if she was going to accept. She said she was thinking about it. I said she needed to accept. She looked at me with that evaluating expression of hers, checking whether I was being honest or just being kind. I said it again, more firmly this time, that her work was genuinely good and the world needed to see it. She went quiet for a second and said she would think about it more. 2 weeks later, she texted me saying she had accepted. The show was scheduled for March of 2020, exactly 1 year after that first day in the studio where everything had started. I thought that date coincidence was too beautiful to be only a coincidence. Maya said it was probably just a coincidence. I said I did not believe that. She laughed in that way of hers, quietly, almost inward, and said I was too romantic. I said I had learned it from someone. She pretended not to know who I was referring to, and changed the subject, but she was smiling when she turned away. On a February evening, I was lying on Maya's couch with my head in her lap, while she read a book and ran her hand absently through my hair, that automatic gesture of someone comfortable enough to do something without thinking about it. I was looking up at the ceiling thinking that 1 year earlier, around that same time, I had been in my own apartment unable to name what was missing. And now I knew the name. And the name was sitting on her couch running her hand through my hair reading a book about watercolor. I smiled at the ceiling for no specific reason in the middle of that thought. Maya noticed and asked what I was smiling about without looking up from the page. I said I was just happy to be home. She turned one page of the book and said nothing. but I felt her hand slow down in my hair for just a moment, which was her way of saying everything she was not putting into words. March of 2020 arrived with a piece of news that nobody had been expecting. Not about me, not about Maya, not about my family. It was about the entire world at the same time. The pandemic reached the United States with that speed of something you follow from a distance, and then suddenly, it is at your front door. In Savannah, the first shelter-in-place measures began in the second week of March. Businesses closing, events being canceled, the streets of that city I knew by heart going quiet in a way that felt genuinely unreal. The art show on Congress Street was canceled 2 days before it was supposed to open. Maya called me when she found out. Her voice was calm the way it always was, but I knew Maya well enough by then to hear the difference between her real calm and the calm she used when she was holding something together. It was the second kind. I said I was coming over. She said I did not need to. I went anyway. When I arrived, she was in the second bedroom, the studio, sitting in the chair in front of the easel with the 3 pieces for the show leaning against the wall. She was not working, she was just looking at them. I walked in, pulled a chair beside her, and sat down without saying anything. August was curled in the corner of the room in a ball of orange fur, sleeping without a care in the world. We sat there together in silence, looking at the paintings for a stretch of time I could not measure. I said the work was beautiful. She said she knew, not with arrogance, with that honesty of hers that never had vanity in it, but also never had false modesty. I said the world was going to see those paintings, that it was only a matter of time. She said she hoped I was right, and then she turned to look at me and asked if I would like her to paint something specifically for me. One piece. Just for me. Not for any show, not for anyone else to see. I said yes before I had fully finished processing the question. The shelter-in-place rearranged everything. Modeling contracts were being canceled one after another throughout March and April. In-person shoots, events, launches, everything suspended with no return date. I had spent the previous years running from one job to the next, and suddenly I had too much time and did not quite know what to do with it. I learned that the running sometimes also serves the purpose of keeping you from sitting still with your own thoughts for too long. Maya and I started sharing our days in a way that the pandemic created without asking our opinion. She would come to my apartment, or I would go to hers, and we developed a shared isolation routine that had a different kind of intimacy than anything I had known before. It was not the planned Wednesday meeting anymore. It was waking up, making coffee, her painting in the studio while I tried to have video calls with Sandra about the agency situation, lunch together, afternoon together, dinner together. It was the whole of life together, with all the small details that the whole of life carries. I discovered things about Maya during that period that only time standing still inside a home reveals. That she sang quietly to herself while she did the dishes without realizing she was doing it. That she always woke up before me and sat on the balcony with her coffee before anything else. That she had the habit of dog-earing book pages and then regretting it and trying to smooth them back out. That when she was concentrating deeply on a painting, she would bite her lower lip slightly without noticing. These are the details that do not fit into any conversation, but that make up who a person actually is when nobody is performing. Maya taught me to do watercolor on an afternoon in April. I was terrible at it. She was patient. She stood beside me, guiding my hand with hers, showing me the right pressure for the brush, how much water to mix with the paint. I made a blue mess that she said looked like the ocean, but that looked far more like a paint accident. We laughed for a long time about that blue mess. I kept the paper. I still have it today. My mother Ruth started calling more frequently during the pandemic. The conversations gradually got a little longer, a little less careful. She would talk about my father, about the church doing services online, about new recipes she was trying during the quarantine. On a call in April, she asked, for the first time since our conversation back in December, how I was really feeling. She did not ask about Maya by name, but she asked how I was really feeling. I said I was genuinely doing well. She said that was what she wanted to hear. We went quiet for a second, and then she asked if I wanted her biscuit recipe she had been perfecting. I said I did. And that biscuit recipe was the gentlest bridge she knew how to build in that moment. On a May evening, late, Maya and I were lying on the couch in my apartment in silence. Her with a book, me doing nothing, just existing there. I turned my face toward her and said I wanted to tell her something. She put the book down and looked at me. I said that never in my life had I felt as much in the right place as I felt when I was with her, that I had spent 27 years feeling slightly out of place everywhere, at work, in my family, in relationships, and that around her that feeling disappeared completely. She looked at me for a moment, and then she put the book on the table, turned sideways on the couch, and faced me directly. She said she was going to tell me something too. She said that when she walked into that dressing room in March of 2019 and saw my reflection in the parallel mirror, she knew I was going to matter. She did not know how, did not know the size of it, but she knew. I sat looking at her without knowing what to do with that. And then I moved closer and pressed my forehead against hers, eyes closed, our hands finding each other between us. And we stayed like that for a stretch of time that was exactly the right amount of time. May of 2020 was the longest month I had ever lived through. Not in a bad way, in a dense way, full of layers. The world outside was in a chaos that showed up on the phone every time I unlocked the screen. Numbers, headlines, uncertainties that nobody had answers for. And in here, in my apartment in Ardsley Park, or in Maya's place on East Jones Street, there existed a fragile but completely real bubble that I was learning to live inside without taking for granted. Maya finished the watercolor she had promised to paint for me on an afternoon in May. She called me into the studio with that understated way of hers, no fanfare, no build-up. The painting was resting on the easel with a dish towel draped over it. She pulled the cloth off without ceremony and stood beside it waiting for my reaction. It was a watercolor of a park. A wooden bench under a large oak tree with 2 coffee cups placed beside it. No people, just the bench, the tree, the cups, and the Spanish moss hanging down from the branches the way it does all over Savannah. I recognized it immediately. It was the park in Ardsley Park. It was our bench. I stood looking at it for a long time without being able to say anything. She said it was mine. I said thank you in a way that was not enough to carry what I actually meant, and we both knew it. I hung the watercolor on the bedroom wall that same afternoon, in the spot that was visible from the bed. The first thing I would see when I woke up every morning. Maya watched me hang it with her hands in her pockets, and that expression I had learned to recognize as her expression when she was happy, but did not want to make noise about it. When I stepped down from the chair and turned around, she was smiling. I walked over to her and held her for a long time, my arms around her shoulders, and my chin resting on her shoulder. The kind of hold that does not count seconds, because it is not worried about time. She put her hands over mine where they were crossed in front of her and stayed like that. The kitchen smelling like the dinner we had made, the candles on the table nearly burned down. Savannah outside the window going about its evening completely unaware. June brought something neither of us had seen coming. A digital fashion magazine based out of New York reached out to the agency specifically requesting me and Maya for a campaign that was going to be produced remotely. Each model photographed in her own home by a local photographer, with art direction happening over video call. It was a campaign about women in isolation, about beauty in the everyday, about authenticity. Sandra called me excited. I said yes immediately, and then I asked if Maya had already been contacted. She said yes, that the request was for both of us together. I hung up the phone and stood smiling in my kitchen for an embarrassingly long time. The campaign was shot over a week in June. The local photographer was a quiet and talented guy named Andre, who showed up on time and clearly knew exactly what he was doing. We did the individual shots at each apartment on separate days, but there was one day when the art direction called for photos of both of us together in the same space. We used Maya's apartment because of the natural light. Andre spent 3 hours photographing us in everyday situations, making coffee, looking out the window, sitting on the couch. Simple things, natural things, real things. And at some point I noticed I was not posing at all. I was just being, and that difference showed up in the photographs in a way that anyone looking at them would feel without being able to explain exactly what they were feeling. The campaign photos were published in early July. The magazine had a significant digital audience across the United States. In the comments, people talked about how authentic the images felt, how they looked too real to be a campaign. Some people tagged us together, made observations, left comments that ranged from warm to intrusive. Maya read the comments once, and then stopped reading them. I did the same. We had both learned that what existed between us did not need anyone else's opinion to be real. My mother saw the campaign photos. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon without mentioning the photos directly. She talked about other things, about the weather, about the church, about my father. Near the end of the call, she said, almost in passing, that I looked beautiful in those magazine photos. Just that. I said thank you. She said you are welcome. And we sat in a second of silence that had a different weight than the silences before it. It was a silence that was learning to be lighter. Finn sent me a message when he saw the campaign too. He said the photos were stunning, and that I looked genuinely happy. He asked if I was. I said I was. He said he was glad to hear that, and sent his best. I sent mine back and sat there thinking that this man had more generosity in him than most people I had ever known. Sometimes life surprises you with who decides to stay on your side in ways you had not expected. On a July evening, Maya and I were on the small balcony of her apartment, that balcony that barely fit 2 chairs, listening to Savannah at night. She had lit a candle because the balcony light bulb had burned out, and she had not replaced it yet. We were both in the candlelight with the Georgia night sky above us, that deep blue of a southern summer night that is different from any other blue. She reached over and took my hand in a casual, natural way, like someone who has done that many times before, and laced her fingers through mine. And we stayed like that, holding hands on the tiny balcony, listening to the city without needing anything more than that. I thought that night about everything it had taken to get there. The rejection email read with a flash going off in my face, the parallel mirrors in the dressing room, the hands that stayed 1 second too long on the necklace, the 2-hour coffee on Jones Street, the park bench, the shoulders leaning, the space between the hands that was a conscious choice, the kitchen, the crooked words, the 3-second kiss that changed everything, the 2 messages on the screen at 11:47 at night. Everything that had hurt, and everything that had been worth it. And I was sitting on a tiny balcony in Savannah, Georgia, holding Maya's hand with the summer sky overhead, and that made every single piece of it make complete sense. August of 2020 was the month Savannah held on to its summer heat the way it sometimes does. That thick, humid warmth that does not apologize for itself and does not move on until it is ready. I was at Maya's apartment on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang with a number I did not immediately recognize. I answered. It was my Aunt Margaret, the same aunt who had recognized my anonymous Twitter account and told my mother. I looked at the number for 2 rings before picking up. Margaret is 51 years old, a high school history teacher at a public school on the south side of Savannah, and she has always been the more direct of my mother's 2 sisters. Not in a hard way, in an honest way. She said hi, Lily, with a voice that did not have any trap in it. I said hi back and waited for the reason she was calling. She said she wanted to apologize. I did not immediately understand, and she explained. She said that when she recognized my Twitter account, she had told my mother without thinking through what that meant for me, without stopping to ask whether I was ready to have that conversation. She said she had done it out of concern, but that concern without care could hurt just as much as carelessness. I sat quietly for a moment, not knowing what to say. I told her I understood, and I meant it, because the conversation with my mother had been hard, but it had needed to happen. And maybe without that push, It would have kept waiting for a right moment that never would have arrived on its own. Margaret was quiet for a second, and then said that my mother was trying. She said she had known her sister for 51 years, and that when Ruth loved someone, she always found her way, even when it took longer than everyone around her would have liked. I kept that with me for a long time after I hung up. Maya was in the studio when I got off the phone, and I went in to tell her about the call. She listened to everything and then said she thought it was a genuinely beautiful thing when people had the courage to apologize for real. She said it was one of the hardest things that existed, because a real apology meant admitting you were wrong, with no guarantee of being forgiven. I thought about how many times in my life I had swallowed an apology, because I was afraid of what the answer might be. Maya had a way of turning simple conversations into things that kept circling in my mind for days afterward. It was on a Friday in August that my mother showed up at my apartment without calling first, exactly like my father had shown up with the food container months before, except this time with no container. Just her, with her purse on her shoulder and a handkerchief in her hand that she wound around her fingers when she was nervous. I opened the door and we stood looking at each other for a second in the doorway. I said, "Come in, Mom." She came in. She looked around the apartment with that particular mother look that catalogs everything within seconds. The watercolor of the park bench on the bedroom wall, visible through the open door. The potted plant on the living room windowsill that Maya had given me. 2 jackets hanging on the hook by the entry. One mine and one Maya's, that she had left the week before. My mother saw all of it without commenting on any of it. I made coffee because I did not know what else to do with my hands. We sat at the kitchen table with our cups in front of us. She spent a moment looking at her coffee before speaking. When she spoke, she said that she had spent months praying, asking for understanding, and that she had arrived at a conclusion she had not expected to reach. She said she did not understand everything yet, that it would probably take more time to make peace with things that went against everything she had learned her whole life. But that when she prayed for my well-being, when she asked God to protect me and make me happy, the answer that came back was the same regardless of everything else. That she wanted me to be happy, and that she could no longer separate that wanting from the rest. I had to press my lips together hard. She kept going. She said she wanted to meet Maya. She did not say in what capacity, did not put any conditions on it. Did not explain what meeting meant in her terms yet. She just said she wanted to meet the person who was in her daughter's life. I set my coffee cup on the table carefully, because my hand was trembling slightly. I said I would arrange it when Maya was comfortable with the idea. My mother nodded. She picked up her cup, took a sip of coffee, and then looked at the watercolor visible on the bedroom wall and asked who had painted it. I said Maya had. She looked at it for a moment and said it was very beautiful. Just that. Very beautiful. I called Maya as soon as my mother left. I told her everything, every detail, the watercolor, the plant, the 2 jackets on the hook. Maya listened in silence. When I finished, she went quiet for a few seconds, and I heard through the phone that she was letting out a slow breath. The kind of breath someone releases when they have been holding it without realizing. Then she said she was glad. Simple as that. She was glad, and I knew from the tone of her voice that glad was carrying a great deal of things she was not putting into words in that moment. We scheduled a dinner for a Friday evening in September. My mother, my father Bill, me and Maya. At my apartment because it was neutral territory in a way that my parents' house was not quite ready to be. I spent the weeks between August and September in a state that was a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. Maya stayed relaxed about the dinner in a way that surprised me. She said she was not trying to win anyone over, that she was going to be herself, and the rest was what it was. I told her that attitude was braver than it sounded. She shrugged with that smile of hers that showed up more in the corners of her eyes than in her mouth. The dinner was coming, and I knew it was not just a dinner. It was a moment when the 2 worlds I had spent years keeping separate inside myself were going to sit down at the same table, with plates and food and the sound of silverware, and the uncomfortable silences that every first time carries. I did not know how it was going to go. But for the first time in a long time, I was not trying to control what I could not control. I was just waiting. And that difference meant everything. The Friday of the dinner arrived on a September evening in 2020, when Savannah was in that particular transition between the last of the summer heat and the first suggestion that fall might eventually arrive. I spent the entire morning cleaning an apartment that was already clean, reorganizing things that were already organized, moving 2 chairs around the dining table 3 times before putting them back exactly where they had started. Maya arrived at 4 in the afternoon to help me cook and found me repositioning a small candle centerpiece for the 4th time. She gently took it out of my hands, put it back where it had originally been, and said it looked perfect. I took a slow breath and decided to believe her. We cooked together that afternoon, a roasted chicken with vegetables and a salad, the kind of home cooking that does not need to impress, because the point was never the food. Maya had understood that and chosen the menu with that awareness. While we cooked, she stayed close beside me in the kitchen, our arms brushing in the small space. And every now and then she would rest her hand briefly on my shoulder as she moved past. Something quick, just a reminder that she was there. Those small touches said more than any speech I could have prepared for myself about being okay. My parents arrived at 7 o'clock exactly. My father Bill knocked with that particular knock of his. 3 evenly spaced taps, the same way he had always knocked on my bedroom door when I was a child. I opened it. They were both standing in the hallway, my mother in her navy blue dress that I knew as her important occasions dress, my father in a jacket that he reserved for things he considered significant. I hugged them both, and then turned toward the apartment where Maya was standing near the table, with a calm expression and her shoulders relaxed. I said each of their names, introducing them. Maya stepped forward and extended her hand to my mother first. My mother looked at the extended hand for 1 second, and then shook it. My father was next. He shook Maya's hand firmly and said good evening in that deep voice of his. Maya said good evening back without looking away. I held my breath without realizing I was doing it. The first 15 minutes were the most careful. We sat in the living room while the chicken finished roasting, and the conversation moved the way first-time conversations do. The weather. How Savannah had been managing the pandemic. The neighborhood. My father said little, as he always did. My mother asked polite questions about Maya's work, about photography, about what modeling was like regionally. Maya answered with her natural ease, not trying too hard to please, not pulling back too far. She was simply herself, and that was more powerful than any strategy I could have suggested to her beforehand. It was my father who broke the careful atmosphere in a way I had not anticipated. He looked at the watercolor painting on the bedroom wall. The door was open, and asked Maya if she had painted it. Maya said yes. He looked at it for a moment, and then said she had real talent. 3 words. My father, who measured every word he released into the world with the precision of someone who understood their weight, had used 3 of them to tell Maya she had real talent. I looked down at my plate so nobody would see my expression. The conversation loosened as the evening went on. We moved to the table, I served dinner, and somewhere between the first and second course, the stiffness in everyone's shoulders simply dissolved. My mother asked Maya where she had learned the seasoning on the chicken, because she had recognized a flavor she could not identify. Maya said it was something she had brought from Nashville, her grandmother's blend. My mother said she would like to learn it sometime. And that small exchange of a seasoning recipe between my mother and Maya was the most ordinary and simultaneously the most significant thing that happened at that dinner. My mother's dessert was a peach cobbler she had made that afternoon and brought over still warm. Maya took a bite and closed her eyes for 1 second with an expression of completely genuine appreciation. She said it was the best peach cobbler she had ever tasted. My mother looked at her carefully, assessing whether it was a compliment or the truth, and then decided it was the truth and said she would share the recipe. I sat watching that exchange with something in my chest that I did not have enough words to properly describe. My mother offering Maya her peach cobbler recipe. It was small, and it was enormous at the same time. When my parents left close to 10 o'clock, my mother held me in the doorway for slightly longer than her usual hugs. She did not say anything while she was holding me. She did not need to. My father put his hand briefly on the top of my head as he passed. That gesture he had made since I was a little girl, and that I had thought he had stopped doing years ago, and walked to the elevator without looking back. I closed the door and leaned against it for a second before turning back into the apartment. Maya was clearing the dinner plates when I came back into the living room. I walked over to her, took the plates from her hands and set them in the sink unwashed. And then I held her from behind with my arms around her shoulders and my chin resting on her shoulder. That way of holding someone when you want to be very close. She put her hands over mine, where they crossed in front of her and stayed like that. The kitchen still smelling of the dinner, the candle on the table nearly finished, Savannah outside quiet the way it gets after 10. She said, without turning around, that she had really liked my parents. I said they had really liked her too. She asked how I knew. I said I had known my father for 27 years, and that he did not use the words real talent for just anything. She was quiet for a moment, and I felt her take a slow breath. Then she turned her face to the side, and I did the same, our foreheads almost touching, our eyes close together, that familiar distance we both knew well. She said thank you. I asked for what? She said for everything. And I knew exactly what everything meant, because it was the same everything I felt every time I looked at her. October of 2020 arrived with that feeling of a year reaching its final stretch, while still having plenty happening inside it. The pandemic continued. The world was still in that suspended state that had started back in March. But life had found its ways of continuing within the limits that existed. My life had found its own ways too. Maya received a new exhibition proposal in October. This time it was an online gallery, a project that had grown directly out of the pandemic. Art galleries from cities across the country that had moved into the digital space and created a virtual platform where artists could show their work without depending on physical venues being open. She told me about it on a Wednesday morning while we were having coffee by the window of my apartment, her plant between our chairs on the sill, the October sunlight coming through with that particular quality of southern fall light that is softer and warmer than summer but still generous. I told her she needed to accept, before I had even finished hearing the details. She looked at me over her cup with that evaluating expression. I said I knew she was going to say she needed to think about it. She said that was exactly what she was going to say. I said that she had too much talent to keep waiting for the world to open a door the exact right size, that sometimes you had to climb through the window. She went quiet for a moment, and then said I was starting to sound like her. I said I had learned from someone. She accepted the proposal that same day. The online gallery opened in November with the 3 watercolors that had been canceled back in March, plus 2 new ones she had completed during the pandemic. One of the new ones was a watercolor of a kitchen seen from inside. Pots on the counter, a small table, 2 cups, the warm yellow glow of an overhead light. Anyone visiting the gallery would see a beautiful domestic scene. I saw the kitchen in her apartment on East Jones Street. I saw that July night in 2019, the dinner on the floor, the movie nobody watched, the crooked words that were the most honest I had ever spoken. When I told Maya I had recognized it, she smiled without confirming or denying. I did not need confirmation. My mother Ruth shared the link to Maya's online gallery in the family group chat on her phone. No caption, no explanation, just the link. I sat looking at that message in the group for a long time, without being able to believe what I was seeing. My Aunt Margaret responded with a heart. A cousin commented that the paintings were stunning. My father said nothing in the group, but sent me a separate message that said simply, I saw it. Just that. I saw it. I kept that message. Finn called in November too, this time with news about his own life. He had started seeing someone, a woman named Anna, an architect he had met through a work connection during the pandemic. He talked about her with that particular lightness of someone who is genuinely well, not performing anything. I was happy for him in the way that is only possible when you no longer carry any weight from a previous relationship. We talked for almost an hour about our respective lives, and when we hung up, I realized that Finn had stopped being a complicated part of my history and had simply become a friend. That was a gift I had not expected to receive. On an afternoon in November, Maya and I were walking along the path by Forsyth Park in Savannah, one of those warm fall afternoons that Georgia keeps producing long after the rest of the country has given up on warmth. We walked side by side at the same unhurried pace, no rush, our hands held together in that way that had become completely natural. An older couple passed us going the other direction, and the woman smiled at us. Not a curious smile, a recognizing smile, the kind people give when they see something they know. Maya squeezed my hand lightly when the couple passed. I squeezed back. December arrived, and with it, the end of a year that had been the most layered of my life in every possible sense. I was sitting on the small balcony of Maya's apartment on a Sunday afternoon when she came out with 2 coffees and sat beside me. We spent some time in silence looking at the street below. Savannah on a Sunday in December has that end-of-year quality, Christmas decorations on the storefronts along Broughton Street, people moving at a slightly slower pace than usual, that warmth that mixes with the occasional cool breeze coming off the river. Maya said, looking at the street, that she had something she wanted to ask me. I said, "Go ahead." She turned her face toward me and asked if I would consider moving in with her the following year. It was not a dramatic proposal. There was no grand gesture, no prepared speech. It was Maya being Maya, direct and calm, and without unnecessary decoration. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about everything it had taken to be sitting on that balcony at that particular moment. And then I asked if the apartment had enough room for my potted plant. She said there was exactly 1 windowsill waiting for it. I said, then it was a yes. She smiled. Not that small corner of the eye smile of hers. It was an open smile, the kind that appears when a person stops holding something back. I could not remember seeing that specific smile on her before, and I sat there for just a second storing it before doing anything else. Then she took my hand and stayed like that, looking out at the street, our 2 coffees cooling on the small side table, Savannah below going about its life completely unaware that up on that tiny balcony, one of the simplest and most enormous decisions I had ever made had just been made without a single wasted word. December of 2022 arrived with that particular Savannah warmth that the city keeps even at the end of the year, that soft southern December light that feels more like a gentle exhale than a cold arrival. I was 29 years old, Maya was 32, and August had reached that age that veterinarians estimate with a shrug, and that she herself seemed entirely unbothered by. The apartment on the east side of the historic district had settled into that particular state of a genuinely lived-in home. Too many books on every available surface, paintbrushes that migrated from the studio to the living room shelf and back again, too many shoes in the closet, and the potted plant on the windowsill that had grown so large that Maya had bought a bigger pot in September and repotted it with the focused seriousness of a surgeon, which made me laugh for a very long time. The Jardines Gallery in Atlanta had confirmed a second exhibition of Maya's work for March of 2023. This one would be larger, more pieces, a longer run, and with a printed catalog, the kind of publication that stays. She had spent much of the second half of the year working on new pieces. Those long studio mornings I had learned to recognize by the number of hours the studio door stayed closed, and the number of paint traces on her hands that she forgot to wash off before coming into the kitchen looking for coffee. I had kept photographing those paint-stained hands without her knowing. The album on my phone had 47 pictures. My own work had taken a direction I had not planned, but that made complete sense from where I was standing. After the response to the jewelry campaign interview back in May, other invitations had arrived. Not all modeling work, different things. A digital fashion magazine wanted a monthly column about the reality behind the industry. A cosmetics brand wanted me as the face of an authenticity campaign. A podcast platform had reached out wanting to have a conversation. I had said yes to some and no to others, with a clarity of judgment I had not possessed at the beginning of my career. Sandra said I was becoming selective. I said I was becoming honest. She said those were the same thing. I agreed. The calls from young women had kept arriving after that first one back in June. Not many, not every day, but they came. Always through Instagram, always with that voice of someone speaking about something they had kept stored away for far too long. I answered every one I could manage. Maya knew about these calls and never commented in a way that felt like intrusion, but sometimes I would finish one and walk back into the kitchen, and she would have 2 coffees ready without me having asked. That way she had of being present without making noise about it was one of the things I loved most about her and knew I would keep loving for a very long time. On an afternoon in November, I was straightening up the desk in our small home office when I found the blue folder with the documents from the courthouse from December of 2021. I opened it and looked at the papers for a moment, the signatures, the date, the official stamp. I put it back in the folder and went to the studio. Maya was working on a large canvas, her back to me, that rhythmic brush movement I could recognize from the other room. I stood in the doorway for a second just watching. She said, without turning around, that she had been around me long enough to know when I was standing in the doorway. I said I knew. She asked what I needed. I said I did not need anything, that I was just looking. She stopped her brush for 1 second, and then went back to work without saying anything more. But I saw the curve of a smile on the profile of her face from across the room. My mother, Ruth, and my father, Bill, came for dinner at the apartment on a Friday evening in November. It had become a regular thing over the months, not every week, but with a consistency that had the comfort of established things. My mother had taught Maya a roasted chicken seasoning that was half Nashville and half Savannah, an accidental fusion that had produced something neither of them had planned, and that my father had declared the best version of the dish he had ever tasted. My father did not make declarations like that casually, which made the declaration significant enough that Maya had written the recipe down in a notebook. At that November dinner, my mother brought an envelope. She set it on the table near the end of dessert without ceremony. I looked at the envelope and then at her. She said she had a friend who did handmade bookbinding, the kind of thing where you take printed photographs and turn them into a small handcrafted hardcover book, and that she had commissioned one. I opened the envelope. It was a small book with a hardcover and photographs I had not known existed. Photos from the September dinner of 2020, the first time Maya had eaten with my parents. Photos from the opening of the Atlanta exhibition. Photos from the courthouse in December. Photos that my mother had been taking throughout the months with that phone of hers, with the quiet dedication of someone documenting something important, without ever announcing that was what she was doing. The last photo was from a dinner earlier that same November, all 4 of us at the table, my parents and the 2 of us, with the naturalness of people who are exactly where they are supposed to be. I closed the book and sat holding it for a moment. Maya, beside me, put her hand over mine without saying anything. My mother took a sip of her coffee like she was not waiting for any particular reaction. My father said that your mother worked on that for 3 months. I looked at my mother. She looked away toward her coffee in that way of hers when she has done something significant and does not know how to receive the recognition of it. I got up, went to her, and held her. She held me back with that mother strength that does not diminish with time. And we stayed like that while the dinner cooled on the table and nobody minded at all. December of 2022 arrived on its right day, and we marked 1 year since the courthouse the way that made sense for us. No party, no guests, nothing elaborate. Maya woke before me as always, and when I opened my eyes, she was back in bed with 2 coffees and a smile that I recognized immediately as the smile she kept for things she held carefully. I asked what it was. She said, "Happy 1 year." I said, "Happy 1 year back." August, as though aware of the date, jumped onto the bed between us and settled there with that particular majesty of hers, which we interpreted as her form of participation. We drank the coffee in bed with August between us and the December Savannah light, coming through the large window with that quality of southern warmth that I had come to associate with everything good. Later that day, I went to the bedroom to get a book and stopped in front of the watercolor of the park bench. It had been on that wall since the day Maya gave it to me, had never needed to move, had never needed to be anywhere else. I looked at the bench, the 2 coffee cups beside it, the large oak tree above with the Spanish moss hanging down the way it did all through Savannah. I thought about that June afternoon in 2019, the warmth of the southern evening, the shoulders leaning, the space between the hands that was a conscious choice. Everything it had cost since then, and everything that had arrived. I was no longer the person who had sat on that bench that afternoon. I was something more than that. Something that the person on that bench in June of 2019 would not have been able to fully imagine for herself. Maya appeared in the doorway of the bedroom with paint on her hands and saw me looking at the painting. She came to stand beside me and looked at it with me. We were quiet together for a moment, both of us looking at the bench, the cups, the tree, and then she took my hand with her paint-stained hand and stayed like that. I looked at my hand marked with her paint and did not move to clean it. We stood there looking at the watercolor, holding hands, in the bedroom that was ours, in the apartment that was ours, in the city that had been the backdrop for all of it. Savannah outside carrying on with its own life. And me in here with mine, which had finally grown into exactly the right size.